I am very happy to welcome Ol Mushgrove Beck, Amber Shakir, and Scott Somerville, who all within their own rights are specialists in the area that I know nothing about. So I'm very excited to be able to ask them all the questions that have been going through my mind, and hopefully the questions will be helpful for yourself, but I'll also make sure not to be too selfish and leave some room for you all to ask your questions towards the end. So hi and welcome. Thank you for being here, guys.
Hello. Thank you.
As I said, I don't know much about AI, but I know part of the conversation, I've once heard someone describe that AI is like toothpaste, it's out of the tube, and there's no point us trying to get it back into the tube. We need to learn how to create art out of it. So with that being said, in your respective roles, how have you seen the introduction to Gen AI in your organization? And what's the talk on the ground floor? Oh, could you start?
I work for a company called Novo Nordisk, a pharma company. Our contribution is developing new drugs, and AI was first introduced really in scale in our early research and development area. And it has really had a significant impact on the way we develop drugs. The opportunity to screen a lot more compounds, the opportunity to actually use genetic data to find a new treatment for, and in this case, it's actually really brilliant for finding treatments for rare diseases where not many people actually have the disease. And without AI, nobody would ever be able to actually invest the time and resource required to develop drugs. So that's where we started. Second, where I saw it really start to have an impact is similar to the presentation we just saw. That's more towards the front line. How do we actually use AI to create better customer engagement? Drugs are still being sold with medical representatives and visiting doctors explaining how to use it best. And there it has had a significant impact on making sure that we deliver relevant information at the right time to the physician. Now we are starting to see it being applied in all the staff functions also. And that's where I sit. And where it may not have had the same profound cultural impact on the company when it was early research, maybe some on the front line, but now we really see that using AI starts to impact the company culture. And that's my interest in the subject as Chief Culture Officer of Novo Nordisk. How do we actually create still a work environment and a culture that is one that we would like to have across the company?
Thank you very much. And Amber, if you could also give some context into your role and what you've seen on the ground floor in organisations with Gen AI.
Sure. So I'm a partner at Gate One, and I look after our experience, digital, data and AI practices. So we're probably slightly differently. I'm not going to talk about Gate One. I'll talk about the clients that I'm doing this work for, who are at varying levels of maturity when it comes to Gen AI. So we've got a range of clients who, and it kind of goes in waves for me, whether it's Gen AI or any other tech. Usually it's the frontline customer-facing websites, service centres, where Gen AI is getting deployed quickly. So service bots, knowledge bots, how you can start to co-opt all the digital data that you have in your organisation to drive better customer interactions. We're then seeing a tier of clients who are saying, well, how do I actually harness this to democratise data science and drive better insight to innovation in my organisation? And then there's some really far out there, usually pharma companies actually, doing some really exciting things around molecules, combining Gen AI, traditional AI, and then 3D virtual reality to really simulate environments where they can do better product innovation and product development. So we're seeing different levels of maturity in the ask that comes through. There are some organisations that are saying, we've identified some use cases for Gen AI. Can you help us risk assess them? Which order should I do my implementation in? What sequence is going to land the most value for our organisation? So I'm seeing quite a spectrum of different types of asks and needs from Gen AI. And I think what I'm what I'm seeing a lot of is FOMO, fear of missing out. And I've had that word a couple of times today. But that fear of missing out, I think I'm saying quite a lot to my clients. Does this problem have an AI solution or not? Because let's not try and shoehorn Gen AI and AI to solve for every problem. Some things can be automated. Some things I think should be a hybrid of automation and human touch, and some things should just be human. So what's that balance look like for your organisation?
And I think to pick up on that, so I work at E.ON, so large energy company on the sort of marketing and comms side. So conscious of the title, is how do you get to impact beyond hype? So as a comms and marketing person, hype's really important, but actually then falls away, doesn't it, with the impact? And I think just there's a thread here, isn't there, which is for us, and again, it's the risk, isn't it, of big corporates especially. Sometimes you can put a team on a thing and it becomes somebody owns AI, almost you were talking. Thankfully, we've not done that. It's, across Europe, we've got teams using it being AI as a tool. So in the same sort of way, you've got, different ways to solve problems. Can you tap in and just be open to those possibilities? But a really important area for us, we've got around 6-7 million customers in the UK, hundreds of thousands of businesses we help, cities, local authorities, governments we work with. There's not one use case, there's not 10, there's literally all the use cases for that purpose. Mm-hmm. But a really key bit of this is probably not, the hype's important around AI, opening up people to opportunity. Impact's always important for all of us, because otherwise, what's the point? Mm. But the third bit, I think, around all of this is acceptance. And to your point, we're doing a lot of work at the minute within our contact centres, within customer service, helping vulnerable customers. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And we're dealing a lot of the time, okay, it's energy, it's quite a rational, logical product, but we're talking about keeping people warm in their homes. We're talking about, the things that energy enables you to do. And we're dealing with a lot of people's vulnerabilities in their homes as well. So actually that human touch is really important. So we're figuring it out, I think, as well.
Yeah, I like your Jeff Goldblum Jurassic Park. You'll get a few 90s movies references probably from this panel, but you're absolutely right. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there was an example that we were talking about in a roundtable earlier where one of our clients wanted to use Gen AI to solve a problem. Actually, the implementation cost was higher than the problem was costing them right now. So it's like, to what end do we actually want to do this?
Thank you very much. And so just bringing it back to this specific panel, we're looking at strengthening leaders, and there are a lot of people in leadership positions in the room. And I work with leaders quite intimately in terms of their capacity versus their capability. And I think that's a question that comes up a lot. What advice, should I say, would you give leaders in the room to help to manage their team and start to bring AI into the conversation, where they may be managing teams where they're thinking, well, that's another to-do thing on my list. I've just survived a pandemic. Am I allowed to say that word? I'm just managing my workload as is. Is AI going to take my job? Do I have to then, further uptake training when I've limited for capacity at the moment? What can leaders do to help people get on board this Gen AI train?
Yeah, certainly, I think one is be open. I think part of it, it's, most of us fear of the unknown, and that's where the uncertainty comes from. It's not all the answers, but as you've already heard, right, no one has all the answers around this topic. But I think, and this is very clearly nothing I would ever say in E.ON, but, some of us may reflect, often your day-to-day in the office, that work's not the problem, it's dealing with all the stuff around it, right? We go into jobs, you progress, and the further, obviously, as you progress, for example, you tend to spend less time doing the task, what took you into that discipline, that specialism, whatever, in the first place. And I think it is a bit cheesy, and we need to bring it back to reality, but there's an opportunity here where if you can automate, because actually what we're all trying to do is to add value. And I think that's the opportunity for people, is to do what they're actually turning up to do every day at work, which is a really good job. And it's not about replacing wholesale. And I think some of the dafter news stories we've seen out there lead to that. And I think that's probably, it's just, it's not a secret, right? It's openness. But certainly from our perspective, it's trying to just let the teams decide where the use cases are, where we can bring this to life.
Yeah, and I think as leaders, we probably should take this opportunity to redefine what we mean by value and what we mean by performance and what we mean by productivity, because actually I I think, on reflection, we've normalised tedium in the workplace. We've taken Victorian production line practices, we've put them into computers, we've brought them into offices, we've brought them now into our homes, and we haven't actually redefined how we do work. And what is valuable to organisations? Is it in the graft of what we do, or is it in the craft of what we do? And I liken graft to research, collation, analytics, etc. We do those things to derive insight. We then use that insight to drive a solution or an idea. And the value to me is in the idea. It's not in that grafting. And should we be reassessing, giving that graft to the machines and redefining what we mean by value in an organisation? Because I think we can help humans to be more human again at work by actually giving the graft to the machines. And how do we blend the machine with the human and solve for better problems in the world? So many of our clients struggle with capacity to solve for things around better experiences, more human interactions, more faster innovation in medicine. And also they really struggle with starting to really show and prove the value to their ESG, CSR initiatives. What if we could release capacity in our organisations to actually start saving our planet as well? Sorry if I'm going a bit existential, but I kind of go, as leaders, nobody else is going to come and do some of that thinking for us and that reevaluation and reimagining. So I'd kind of challenge to, as almost in your portfolio of change that you might be looking at, how do we keep the server room lights on? How do we transform some low-hanging quick win fruit? But what are we really doing at that tip of that triangle to really reimagine how we do work? Because I think we've had the promise of that with technology for a long time, but it feels reachable now, a proper reimagining.
Yeah. I would like to take it back a little bit. How do we as leaders create an environment, a culture where the organization allows, you're allowed to experiment and try. And when I think back when ChatGPT was introduced, my company was very quick to say, ChatGPT not allowed for business purposes. We don't know if it's safe, can't be used. And yesterday, there was actually a paper published in a Danish newspaper where they have surveyed out of Danish companies, large, small, medium-sized companies, how many have actually now a policy for how you use AI in your company, and 55% have not even thought about it. Then they also had asked how many companies have actually offered education on AI for the organization. 66% of companies have not done anything to educate the organization. Then you're definitely not going to be a fast mover and take advantage of it. Luckily, my company very quickly realized we need to be able to tell the organization how it can be used. We have now moved fast. We have introduced the Microsoft Copilot. We can use it freely. And I think as leadership, we need to set a clear direction for what we expect. We need to be very clear and articulate what do we expect from this. And then we actually need to educate our leaders. What we have done was last year offering first time I've seen that in my many years in the company, where there was a program offered where you didn't have to be sort of enrolled by your leader. You just freely enroll. And we have trained 850 leaders in the company in a program we call Digital Acumen. I did it myself also. And the first 2 sessions were virtual, a lot of in-between online learning. And the last session was actually a 2-day program at IMD in Lausanne. And what struck me there was those 2 days were not about technology. That was actually all about how do you lead an organization that would thrive using this technology. And so if we want to be creating impact over hype, I think it starts actually and start with us as leaders, as human beings, and we cannot ask AI to do that. We can do a lot of things with AI, but it actually starts with us as leaders to create the culture, the atmosphere, the vibrant where we take advantage of this.
And this is where my bias comes in, because I believe an organization is only as successful as the talent it's able to retain, and not the talent, or in this case, the technology that it can implement. And with that being said, I heard a quote where someone said that AI is going to be able to overtake us in IQ, but will never be able to overtake us in EQ. And I think that seems to be a running concurrent theme in the conversations that we've been having here so far this morning. But they're still being referred to as soft skills, as if they're an add-on. Whereas what I'm hearing is that they're very much more of a fundamental skill.
They're not. There's nothing soft about them.
But they always coin as a soft skill,
hardcore
Amber.
technical skills that people need to succeed.
I agree,
And,
but even today on this stage, they were still being referred to as soft skills. And I think it's really important that we address maybe as the fundamental skills, because at one point in time, and I think there's a generational divide in this, at one point in time, people were measured on their output, their innovation of their output, how original, authentic their output was, i.e. a lot of us in here who's gone to university, we're very much aware of the term plagiarism, right? But with the introduction to AI, does that word somehow become obsolete now? And we've got a younger generation who were born into the Gen AI space, who, for them, it's a no-brainer, it's more efficient to use that. So how do leaders actually address that generational gap that there is between the early careers who have grown in this Gen AI space and those who maybe, I think actually you mentioned it yesterday, you called them, you mentioned it in 3 terms. You said the early disruptors, the early adopters, and then the majority. Like, how do we address that generation gap?
That gap in itself, and we see this with any sort of technology rollout, there are early adopters and there are early majorities. The gap between those two when it comes to Gen AI is quite wide. So one of the questions in the previous discussion about, what happens to artists, who's creating all those Gen AI images, and the gentleman said, actually, we use artists to generate those images because they just do it better. How do we start to tap into those early adopters in the organisation, but start to educate the majority? Because this is where change management fundamentals are not going to change just because it's Gen AI. Bringing people on a journey, really showing them the value, having intuitive technology that's easy to use, so human-centred design around your technology, those are the things that are going to help people adopt it. But I think about, you're talking about generation gap. My daughter's 16. She's doing her GCSEs right now. She's had such a love of learning until she hit her GCSEs, because then it became about memorization. And it just irks me that she's doing her GCSEs in exactly the same way that I did them 30 years ago. And I'm just like, for flip's sake, when are we going to teach the right skills to our people? And this fear of that people have of AI taking over our jobs, well, quite frankly, some jobs should be kind of taken over. And, that piece around how are we going to start to create the skill set that people need, or the culture that organizations need for the future? Because I had a stat about Amazon saying that 60% of the jobs we do today didn't exist 40 years ago. So we've all pivoted. We pivot all the time. Every generation pivots, but that pivot now, it's not going to be 40 years. It's going to be 20 and then 10. And so with, Gen Alpha coming through, they're going to reskill every 10 years. How ready are your organizations for that kind of level of retraining and reskilling? I'm looking at you, Scott.
But it is true, though. I think I, started working 20 years ago and used to agency side, but we did some work for the Scottish Qualifications Authority, so the exam board in Scotland mark the exams and stuff. I remember at that time, the then chief exec in interviews had quite a controversial line, because his point was that students should be allowed to take in notes and they should be allowed to take in calculators, and in those days a laptop. And it was really early days, but his point was the world is changing. So again, this sort of rote learning doesn't this was 20 years ago as well, doesn't exist. The world of work will be about synthesizing information. And we see that, don't we, with, those of us with kids. You see that and you sit and you go, don't just take the first result of Google when you're researching, you've got to process. But that's what work is. And Scott Galloway, many of you will know, he's got a really nice line about, AI is not going to take your job. Someone who knows how to use AI will take your job. And I think that's the point here. And, thinking about us as organizations, and you mentioned it in terms of culture. And again, none of us will ever have done this, will we? If you're not allowed to use something officially within work, of course, I would never have done this. You might sit with your own laptop from home and then do the thing and, and get round it that way, because you find a way to get the job done. And I think, that's organizations at the moment that, you talked about, through OpenAI and ChatGPT, we did the same, and understandably so. One, to obviously protect ourselves, protect our customers' data, but very quickly, technical colleagues set up, safe parameters for those of us to quote unquote go and play and work it out, and that's then created, the right space for us. And I think I'd like to think we're one of them companies that are a bit more forward thinking, allowing people to figure out how can this best be used. That's probably for me the best leadership approach, because the tools will be used, whether you officially allow it or not. So you may as well try and bring it inside. And then, to your earlier point, that's how you retain talent. That's how you attract talent. And that's how the company grows. And, back to the original point, that's the value through it as well. But it's another Jurassic Park, isn't it? Nature will find a way, but, your staff will find a way, through this.
Yeah, and maybe also to address this fear, think more about how is this going to replace jobs, and less about that and more about how is this actually going to help you do better in your job. And the best example is from old line. I'm a medical doctor, practiced medicine years ago. I'm old school. I think medicine is an art form, and nobody can do it better than the doctor. 2 of our kids are medical doctors now, and the institution they work in is actually now applying AI to help them diagnose patients. And they say, both of them, the error of margin for them overlooking something is much smaller using this tool. They're not being replaced, but they're much better doing their job, and they, of course, create much better value for patients. So I think it's all about think about how can we actually use this to get better at what we do, and not necessarily how can we make things more efficient and cut workforces. I don't think that's what it's all about. It's about delivering more value in what we do, actually.
And as a sort of quick, quite superficial example, so now think about some of the marketing work we do in our team, and again, it's not it's at the previous discussion, and we've used AI stuff externally before, but you mentioned about the graft and craft. We're already seeing that. So where it's benefiting us in a advertising marketing sense is, used to be storyboards would take a while, and someone with skill needed to create storyboards. You can just, in a very good way, you need the skilled input, but it's a low value piece, right? It's not the work that goes to the outside world. It's a tool to get the ultimate campaign out the door. So using AI there is really good. So it's, higher volume, we get things moving quicker and all the rest of it. But what we're already seeing in terms of the effectiveness of campaigns, the previous example on the cocktails is a great one, right? Because it had a human heart of it in terms of the communities and so on. But we'll all know other campaigns that are out there at the minute starting to look really the same, because generative AI creative has a bit of a look and a feel, or maybe it's people figure it out. So we're seeing a real premium put on the sort of human-made element. So using really skilled photographers, and previously we wouldn't have told people we'd done that, but it's becoming a really interesting engagement point for different online communities. So that craftsmanship, that's around that tactility of stuff, and there's a real premium on high skills, and I think we're beginning to see an opportunity in that as well. So there's a bit of volume that we're using in terms of storyboarding, the stuff that doesn't get to the outside world. But then actually there's a little difference around this where, the human bit of it really resonates with people through that quality.
And it's really important to bring it back to, like both of you are saying, to our people, but then also to that value. And if we can reassess value in terms of customer, colleague, commercial, and capability, and just be really clear that you're actually driving value in one of those dimensions, you start to see where those intersects of achievability and low-hanging fruit and your quick wins are versus your corporate strategy and what outcomes you're actually trying to achieve. And having that framing canvas to help drive innovation in the right spaces, a bit more caution and risk management in other parts of the business. It's finding where you can sort of, do some of the more, you don't want to transform everything all at once, all at the same time, but where can you, maybe it's in your contact centres that you undo and redo. Maybe it's in your employee engagement teams where it's a safer place to play. But there are organisations and companies that are building sandboxes for some of this kind of technology where you can start to play and you can experiment. And, how do you have freedom within a framework in your organisation? Because in some industries, bottom up crowdsourcing works for use cases and solving problems because your front lines know where all those problems are that they have every day. But in other organisations that aren't as big, to crowdsource it, you kind of need a bit more spearheading at a leadership level and a top-down approach. And in some organisations, you're going to need both. We're seeing a mixture of how people approach it.
Okay, I'm just bringing it back to the human element. I really like the fact you were saying that there's a premium on actually having high-skilled humans execute the work because you can see the difference. I really believe that the future of work is still human. I think AI is how we're going to work, but we still need to focus on who's going to do the work. And with that being said, we can't ignore the fact there has been a paradigm shift, not just because with Gen AI, but because we've come out of a pandemic and people's individual capacity to do the work has greatly changed. So in the world of Gen AI, we've heard that actually we can do the work better, we can become more efficient, add more value. And a couple of panels ago, we had someone say that actually it may help increase people's work-life balance. However, we've seen in the reality of technological change over the years that when we have become more efficient at being able to add more value, we just work more in a way that doesn't align, which goes back to what you're saying about the implementation of the Victorian way of working. So with the leaders in the room, what practical things can they look out for? So the first part of my question being KPIs. Naturally, the KPIs, the key performance indicators they're working with, are going to take a change. In what way can they start acknowledging that and implementing that to create the cultural change that ultimately we need to ensure there's sustainability in this new way of working, but also the pragmatism that they can say, all right, these are the things that I can look out for to help my team to work in this new way whilst maintaining their own innovation, vitality and essence, really, that human essence we discussed.
It's a very, very relevant question, and I would like to add to this. I'm also involved in a lot of leadership development, performance leadership, and we're getting more and more questions from leaders in the company. So how do I actually appraise performance now? Because some of the things we appreciate in the past has been good writing skills, good analytical skills, good presentation skills, knowledge. Now that's all at your fingertip with AI. So how in the future are we actually going to make sure that we appraise unbiased, and we haven't found the answer yet, but it's certainly a dialogue that we have, because the way you do performance leadership will have a profound impact on the culture of a company. But I think to your specific questions, we need to, and we are coming out of COVID, and we are coming out of losing some of the connections to our teams because we don't see them in the office every day. It is easier today now, I find, as a leader myself, to overlook the colleagues that are sort of reaching a workload stress level where they're about to break. And we need to be very mindful of that, and we need also create a culture now where we are able to ask those questions openly to colleagues. So, do you have too much on your plate now? And we don't do that enough, but I think it's going to be even more important in the years to come that we actually are open to do that.
I'll go for a couple of things that I already talked to my clients about. I liken it to call handling times in contact centres, where I was just like, well, your call handling time is a measure of something, but does it actually tell me whether there was a quality outcome of that call? Was the customer's query actually resolved? I feel like that about productivity, the way that we term it, And it's a very clock in, clock out kind of way of measuring output and productivity. And I want to go back to more outcomes and quality of those outcomes that drive value for fundamentally customers, shareholders. So I'm not namby-pamby and being all airy-fairy. Like this is hardcore commerciality, right? What do we value in the workplace? And I think things like, my analysis and my ability to pivot table in Excel, are those really valuable things that drive the outcome, or is it a means to an end? So what's the end that we're really trying to drive? And if it's usually, it falls into a few buckets. Does this idea drive growth and conversion? Does this drive cost optimization or process optimization? Is this an innovative idea? Is this a new idea around whether it's product innovation or service innovation? And is this going to defend me from being disrupted? And those are broadly the categories of what we're trying to do as any kind of business. So what's the experience of both your colleagues and your customers that creates a valuable interaction, that creates a really valuable experience? And how do we measure that? Because I think we're still measuring the wrong things. A lot of the time I look at C-suite reporting dashboards and I'm kind of going, but what's the decision you're trying to make? And does this data support that decision? And I don't think we've reassessed in the last few years. Fundamentally, at a strategic level, what's the decisions I'm trying to make? At an operational day-to-day level, what are the decisions I'm trying to make? And in a delivery capacity, what are the decisions I need to make? And we're not optimizing that at all. We've got so much data to be able to do it. And it does sadden me that there's so much data out there and we just don't use it. But how can we start to leverage that for better performance? Because fundamentally, it's the performance and the outcome, the quality outcome that really matters. So how do we drive that?
Yeah, and I think, and one of the questions that's coming about the 4-day week, and if we can use AI to enable our employees, can we then ultimately, I guess, reduce? And it comes back to this thread for me. So where we try and think as a team within the business is around input, output, and impact. We try and boil everything down. That's because I think you see it across lots of organisations. We're not unique in this. Sometimes output is prized above all else. I did a thing. It's like, why did you do a thing? Was it worthwhile doing? And it's if we can get that balance right to focus on the impact. And there's a link to hybrid working as well. We're lucky, as I would put it, as an organisation where we're still individual teams decide how hybrid you are, whether you need to be in or not, and so on. And to speak personally, and again, I say this with love to my team, I couldn't care less where they're sat, right? Be in the office, don't be in the office. I care about the impact we're having on the business. Are people happy because then they do better work, etc. And I think that's the real difficulties when you then try and look in a corporate framework for performance reviews. How does that translate? But I think if we all try and focus on that goal, then we kind of get there happier. And I think, again, expressing very much my own view and not a corporate opinion, I think, things like the 4-day week, again, I was lucky when I started working a number of years ago. I had early bosses. I'd get sent home. I tend to work in bursts, right? And so I'd come in the morning, do some work, or there'd be days where I wasn't quite, creatively thinking, right, or whatever. And it was great. I'd get a tap on the shoulder going, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. Just go home, go and relax, come back the next day, because my boss was trying to get more out of me and knew that if I was happy and firing on all cylinders. And I think I've certainly tried to hold on to that going forward, which is happy people, productive in your own rhythms. It's about that impact of your work. That's what's important. And I think in some of the hybrid, I know it's not this topic, but in some of the hybrid working, there's some big companies recently going back to 5 days in the office. Again, you'll lose talent, you'll lose people, and it's the same with Gen AI. Build it in, think about the impact on work, and that, I think, because otherwise you're just going to get left behind, and it's the genie's out the bottle on it all, so you've got to learn to embrace it.
No, when the 4-day question came up, I smiled because a lot of people do look to the 4-day. Again, I work in sustainable high performance and corporate burnout prevention. So a lot of people look to the 4-day work week and hope that will be the solution, that, we're no longer working in those Victorian times. But the truth behind that is, if we still continue to measure who we are, our self-worth and value based on our productivity and output, the 4-day work week was never going to work. Because by definition, if your measurement of your self-worth and value is based on your output and your productivity, when you're doing nothing and you're resting, which is actually a very productive thing to do for sustainable success, you're not going to do so successfully because you're going to have the itch to feel like you need to do something to prove yourself. So going back to the fact that Gen AI can increase the volume, can increase accuracy, the impact and the efficiency of the work we do, how can we ensure as leaders that we then don't demand that people do even more work to make up for the time we've made back for the efficiency, so something like the 4-day week can be possible? Like, how do we model that culturally, that as individuals?
Those ethics start with us in the room. No one's going to come from outside and give us that guidance. So what's the workplace you want? What's the kind of stuff? I mean, can we make work a bit more fun?
Yes.
Like, you know,
That's
it's so, we so have normalised tedium. It's just, you know, annoying. But it comes back to having some clear frameworks and, you know, principles, operating principles. What are your values as an organisation? Do you have to reassess your values as an organisation? Do your values still stay true, but your behaviours need to change? And actually articulating behaviours as well as values, I think, is going to really help to drive some shifts in perspectives and mindsets. I think there's a question about, I can't see it because the table's in the way,
I'm
and I'm sure.
Quickly. So it's asking, it's a perfect segue what you said into the question. So specific frameworks or tools that you use to ensure that the team, which specific tools and frameworks do you use, and which team in the company takes ownership of that is the question.
I think that's a slightly different question around maybe the tech implementation, and should use cases be defined by technology teams or business teams? Is that where the question was going? Possibly. I don't know who's asked that question. I was going to talk about more sort of cultural and people change frameworks around you know, employee value, you know, propositions, really looking at what do. And not just the workforce of today, because we're now going to have to, we've probably got the biggest intergenerational span of workforces for a while. So what works for, you know, more older generations versus younger generations? What do different employees value? And I think you start from there. What are your value drivers in the organisation, and what will retain people? What will make people happy in their workplace? Start from there, build your principles. I think you crowdsourcing those use cases, I think you crowdsource your new behaviours and your new ways of thinking and working, and definitions of value. Don't just leave it at you guys at the top. Like, you know, crowdsource some of that, because we don't have all the right answers, and we don't have the same lived experience as, you know, Gen Z and you know, well, Gen Alpha's on in work yet, but they will be soon. So I think that's where you start.
So if the question is, what can we do as leaders to make sure that people do not just work more? Now we have access to generative AI and other tools. And I think we have to role model the behavior we like to see in the organization. Example, I worked in Japan for 7 years, and you probably all know Japan has a notorious culture of working very long hours. Japanese government, to boost the economy, but also to make people work less, introduce Golden Friday. So the last Friday of the month, office should close at 2 o'clock. Now, first couple of Fridays, nothing happened. Then I started to walk around the office as president of the company in Japan and say, have a nice weekend. Remember, it's Golden Friday. I don't want to have you stay here all night. And after a couple of months, you know, more and more people actually felt it was okay to leave the office. And I think we have to also be mindful of this and just role model the behavior we want to see in the company. And we need to get all our leaders to role model the culture that we want to sort of permeate through the company.
I agree. This is why I have a soft spot for leadership and line managers, because I really do believe they're the ones who drive and shape the culture of organisations. We've got literally 40 seconds left. So the last question that I'd like to ask is, with AI, will people be more exchangeable in terms of resources for the tasks to do?
No.
30 seconds, tell us.
Yeah. So super quickly, look, I think we've talked about it, I think it's the importance of the individual comes through. if you go back a few years, and again, answering this in a bit of a marketing type way, but it was true of all of us. I'll get the time frame wrong, but for argument's sake, 10 years ago, you couldn't move at a conference for data, right? Data is going to change the world. And then in marketing circles, 5 years ago, you couldn't move for personalization is going to change the world. And then we all realized we're creeping people out too much. It's the same here, I think, with AI. And I say it'll settle. There's questions there about skills and so on. It's the people bit that becomes important. And I think, and everything you've all said, I think, about how do we make sure as leaders we don't exploit this. Ultimately, good companies which are run by good people prosper. And there might be a bit of a race to the bottom. Some will, and some will do the right thing. And you just have to trust, right? That is that life will sort itself out.
It comes back to money, though, because actually employee experience and customer experience, companies who do well on employee and customer experience do better in the FTSE index. So there's a direct correlation between company performance and employee and customer experience. You just can't escape it. It's not a nice to have.
Thank you ever so much, everyone. That is our time today, but there are so many...